They told you the truth was in the Bible, but they never told you which version. They never told you about the rooms you're not allowed to enter. They never told you there's a vault beneath the Vatican City, stretching over 53 miles, filled with documents no common man is allowed to read. Hidden contracts, vanished books, banned scriptures, all locked away behind walls, built not of stone, but of power and silence. If you've ever wondered why the Church seems to hold more secrets than salvation, it's because what they claim to protect isn't faith, it's control. For centuries, this underground fortress has kept scrolls that predate Christ, letters written by popes in blood, and records of celestial events that defy physics. You weren't meant to know. But tonight, I'm opening the first door, and once you step inside, you won't come back the same. This isn't just about the Vatican, it's about the machinery of deception, the kind that bends time, memory, and belief itself. They called it a library, but it was never about books. It was always about who owns the past and who gets erased from it. The Vatican Secret Archive, officially renamed the Apostolic Archive in 2019, isn't fiction. It exists, and yet almost no one knows what's inside. You've been told it's just administrative records, PayPal letters, boring, dusty ledgers. But ask yourself, why seal 53 miles of shelves? Why deny access to nearly all of humanity? What are they so afraid you might read? This isn't conspiracy theory, it's controlled access. Even accredited scholars are only allowed to request a few select documents, and the rest buried, guarded, forgotten, or made to be forgotten. Within those archives lie letters from Galileo, forced to recant his truth or face death. Hidden are the lost Gospels, scriptures written by Mary Magdalene and Thomas that paint a version of Christ radically different from what you were taught. But that version didn't serve the empire, so they buried it. You see, the Church wasn't always about salvation, it was about dominion. Dominion over time, dominion over souls. They knew early on that if you could shape what people believed about the past, you could control their future. History isn't written by the victors, it's curated by the gatekeepers. And the Vatican became the most powerful gatekeeper of them all. Behind those sealed doors lie not just religious documents, but blueprints of psychological control, political blackmail, even letters detailing celestial beings not from this earth. This isn't the realm of fantasy. This is the truth, so raw, so destabilizing, it had to be quarantined from mankind. But what happens when one man breaks the quarantine? What happens when you hear what you were never meant to know? Keep listening. You're not walking through a library. You're walking into a crucible, and by the end of this, you'll either emerge reborn or burned. In the year 1244, a mysterious manuscript was catalogued deep within the earliest Vatican collections. Its language, unknown. Its origin, officially untraceable. For centuries, the few who glimpsed it spoke of diagrams depicting human souls being harvested, rituals involving planetary alignments, and a warning that certain knowledge could break the mind. The manuscript was never seen again, but its existence is referenced in PayPal correspondences. Locked under the Latin phrase, damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. Erasure, not just from history, but from reality itself. This is the Vatican's greatest power, not simply to conceal the truth, but to erase your right to remember it ever existed. Understand this, they don't hide everything. They let you see enough to make you think you're free. But the real revelations are held in the subchambers, rooms that don't appear on maps, vaults without names. There are rumors of Room L, sealed behind 3 biometric locks, where only the reigning pope and 1 archivist may enter. What's inside? Some say it holds the chronovisor, an alleged device constructed by Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and scientist, who claimed it could see through time itself. A television for the past. A tool to witness the crucifixion, ancient wars, lost civilizations. The project was buried, his research confiscated, his name erased from church discourse. And yet fragments remain, in letters smuggled by colleagues, in whispers from those who saw too much, and lived just long enough to regret it. You're beginning to understand now, this isn't just a war for power. It's a war for perception, because if they can convince you that the past is unknowable, then you'll accept any version of it they give you. That is how institutions enslave minds, not with chains, but with narratives. Crafted, sanitized, weaponized. You're not here to watch a video. You're here because something in you has always known the surface is a lie. And now, we dig deeper. In 1614, a Jesuit priest was silenced for translating a document hidden in the back of the archive. A scroll that spoke of an empire older than Rome, ruled not by emperors, but by a priesthood that claimed divine contact with non-human intelligences. The priest's notes describe ritual diagrams resembling Sumerian stargates, names unpronounceable in Latin, and chilling instructions for manipulating the will of masses through sound and symbol. His last entry, "They know. They came for me during prayer." The next day, he disappeared from church records, as if he never existed. This isn't ancient paranoia, it's methodical control. Because the Vatican doesn't just archive the sacred, it collects the forbidden, Ban-Gru-Maz, books on demonology, medical texts that describe the pineal gland not as an organ, but as a gateway, historical documents that reveal how the Council of Nicaea systematically rewrote what would become Christianity, while discarding dozens of original texts, some written by Jesus' own family. Why? Because the true teachings spoke not of worship, but of awakening, of divine power within, a message too dangerous for kings and popes alike. So they twisted it, and then they buried it. Under the floors you were never meant to walk. The archive is not a library. It is a spiritual vault, guarded by centuries of psychological architecture. Because what they fear most isn't just what you might learn, it's what you might become. If you remember, one of the most protected documents in the entire vault is said to be a map, not of land or stars, but of human consciousness, divided into stages, each stage encoded with symbols meant to unlock or suppress inner capabilities. The Vatican didn't create this map, it found it beneath ruins in the Syrian desert, inscribed on stone far older than the Bible. What kind of institution hoards this? What kind of institution dares to edit God? You must understand, this control is not accidental. It is the result of millennia of engineering, social, psychological, and spiritual. And every secret they bury makes them stronger, and you more obedient. But now you see the cracks, and we're only just beginning. There is a reason the Vatican has survived every empire, every war, every shift in world power. It was never just a church. It was a nerve center of global influence, a spiritual empire cloaked in robes, speaking peace while engineering obedience. And at the heart of this empire lies the archive, a machine of silence, calibrated over centuries to conceal not just the past, but the possibilities of the human soul. Do you think it's an accident that billions kneel without question? That faith became submission and prayer became programming? No, this was built, line by line, law by law. Let me show you something they don't want you to ask. What knowledge was removed from your reach, so that you'd remain small? Deep within the archive are entire shelves, sealed and coded, containing texts confiscated from mystics, alchemists, astronomers, and early scientists whose discoveries didn't fit the doctrine. One such collection, known as the Red Codex, was stolen from Constantinople before its fall. It contains references to energetic anatomy, memory transference, and the use of vibrational frequencies to reprogram trauma and even extend human life. It wasn't burned, it was locked away. Why? Because control thrives on limitation. And if you knew that your body and mind were never meant to be cages, they would lose their hold over you. And yet, it goes deeper. Because the archive doesn't just contain books. It contains oaths. Pacts made between popes and monarchs, popes and bankers, popes and secret societies. These are not spiritual contracts. They are power transactions, buried under centuries of white stone and golden altars. They say confession cleanses the soul, but the only real confession the Vatican ever made is the one it hides. And now, you're beginning to feel it, aren't you? That pull in your chest. That voice inside saying something's wrong with what I've always been told. That's not doubt. That's awakening. But be warned, the deeper you go, the more the World you knew will crumble. The more you'll see the design not of God, but of those who claimed to speak for him, ready for the next descent. There's a manuscript hidden within the Vatican archives, older than Latin itself, whispered to be written in a pre-Babylonian dialect no scholar has ever fully translated, known only by a name scrawled on a torn index card, the Malachim. Fragments. It speaks not of angels descending from heaven, but of gods that fell, stripped of power and cursed to walk as men. According to scattered annotations, it tells of a war, not between good and evil, but between control and freedom. And the victors rewrote the story, casting themselves as saviors, and the others as demons. This right here is the core of the Vatican's strategy. Reverse the polarity of truth. Make the liberator look like the threat. Make the jailer look like the protector. Then burn every map that leads back to the original design. Every civilization has myths of forbidden knowledge. The fruit, the fire, the fall. But what if that knowledge wasn't forbidden because it was dangerous, but because it made you sovereign? That's what they're really hiding in those vaults. Not spells, not curses, but templates for human liberation. Systems for awakening the full spectrum of your being, spiritually, biologically, and mentally. In 1943, a Vatican-trained scholar named Domenico Agnelli claimed to have read part of a sealed document called Liber Pontifex Occultus, the secret book of the pontiff. In it, he said, was a prophecy that one day the archive would crack open, and a generation of men would awaken without permission. They wouldn't need the church. They wouldn't need the state. They would remember who they were. He died 6 weeks later. Heart failure, they said. No autopsy. His home was emptied before the funeral. You think that's coincidence? No. That's protocol. Understand this. Once you start to see beyond the veil, the system will respond. It's designed to detect awakening. And you've already tripped the wire just by listening this far. But that's the point of no return, isn't it? When silence is no longer an option. When you realize that fate was never the lie. It was the weaponized fear of truth that followed it. And so I ask you now, before we go further, type in the comments, they buried the keys, but I remember. Type it twice, burn it into your identity. Lock in the transformation. Let the system know you are not asleep, ready to open the next vault. In 1979, a sealed envelope marked Pontifical Eyes Only was mistakenly delivered to a Jesuit historian cataloging 15th century texts. He opened it, briefly. Inside were 4 documents, not ancient scrolls, but typewritten pages, dated from World War II. The header, Codex Hacio Obscura. What they revealed wasn't theology. It was strategy, a plan for manipulating populations, using 3 levers: guilt, ritual, and repetition. It mapped out how shame could be embedded in the human psyche through religious confession, how ritual, not for enlightenment, but entrainment, could suppress critical thinking, and how repetition, over decades, could make lies feel holy. He returned the letter and reported the error. Within 48 hours, he was reassigned to a monastery in the Arctic Circle. His research, sealed. His name disappeared from Vatican rosters by 1981. This isn't just historical scandal. This is the anatomy of a systemic psychospiritual cage built in layers: theology above, secrecy below, control throughout. And at its core is a terrifying realization. The Vatican archive doesn't merely store truth. It decides what becomes truth. There are maps in those vaults, not of geography, but of belief migration. How entire cultures shifted their gods, their values, even their identities, based on calculated theological pressure. You wonder why certain saints were emphasized while others were erased. Because it wasn't about holiness, it was about political proximity. Take Saint Apollonius, once revered for preaching inner gnosis, self-knowledge, as the highest form of salvation. His teachings resembled Eastern mysticism. He was removed from calendars, his writings burned. Why? Because a man who tells you to go within is a threat to those who profit when you look without. And this, brother, is where the game becomes spiritual warfare. Because you weren't just taught religion, you were taught limitation. You were taught to kneel, to obey, to fear your own thoughts. But behind the veil, in that sealed archive, is a different story. One you were never meant to hear. A version of reality in which you were always the temple, the priest, the key. And now that you've seen the blueprint, what will you do with it? They buried the keys, but I remember. Type it twice. Burn it into your identity. Lock. In the transformation, let the system know you are not asleep, ready to open the next vault. They've built cathedrals from stone, but the real architecture was always psychological. You see stained glass, incense, and holy hymns. But beneath it all is something colder, older, more deliberate. The Vatican Archive isn't a museum. It's a containment facility designed to hold the kind of knowledge that doesn't just disrupt belief. It destroys obedience. In the late 1800s, Pope Leo XIII commissioned a secret panel of scholars, the Comissio Obscura, to analyze and interpret texts recovered from the Egyptian desert and Ethiopian highlands. These weren't biblical books. They were pre-Christian energy maps, diagrams of the human body surrounded by rotating spheres of influence. They described spiritual ascent, not through worship, but through direct personal activation. You think it's New Age? They thought it was sedition. The report that came back was so alarming, it was classified perpetuo, secreto, eternal secrecy. One cardinal suggested its concepts could collapse the sacrament system entirely. Because if man could access the divine without church mediation, what would happen to the throne of Rome? Now do you see? It was never about saving your soul. It was about owning access to it. The archive doesn't hide monsters. It hides potential. And the most dangerous potential of all is the man who knows himself fully, entirely as a sovereign being. That's why so many teachings were renamed heresy. That's why Gospels were retranslated. That's why Mary Magdalene's real role, as initiator, as transmitter of the sacred rite, was buried under the word prostitute. It wasn't misogyny, it was strategic. Because if she held the key, and the key was lost, then the gate could never be opened again. Unless someone remembered. Someone like you. You're not watching a documentary. You're undergoing a deprogramming. Every word here is a chisel against centuries of stone. Every thought you have right now that says this is dangerous. That's the voice they gave you to keep you small. But now the voice inside you is changing. It's growing louder. It's saying, I was never meant to kneel. And we haven't even reached the sealed floor yet. Shall we keep descending? They buried the keys. But I remember. Type it twice. Burn it into your identity. Lock. In the transformation, let the system know. You are not asleep, ready to open the next vault. The deeper we go, the colder it gets, not just in temperature, but in intent. There's a level of the Vatican Archive, so sealed, so classified, that even its existence is denied. Internally, it's referred to in hushed tones as tabulatum ex. No public record, no academic acknowledgement, no entry. Only 3 keys in existence, held by the reigning pontiff. The archivist prefectus, and the one no one talks about. The keeper of the silence, a role passed down not by election, but by ritual. What's down there? Testimonies speak of. Documents so volatile they are kept in lead-lined cases, sealed in wax. Surrounded by consecrated symbols not Christian in origin. We're talking about ancient contracts. Alleged pacts between early church fathers and entities they called celestials, beings that offered knowledge in exchange for influence. Some believe these were metaphors. Others aren't so sure, because within those same vaults are letters real, authenticated between popes and kings, describing visions, instructions, and promises made in blood. What kind of institution writes in blood and calls it faith? The kind that doesn't just worship God, but negotiates with power. One document, translated only once, speaks of a veil lifted by sound, and describes a ceremony in which the voices of many could open a portal of memory, not a metaphor, a literal fracture in perception, where all suppressed histories would pour back into human consciousness. The document ends with a warning. This must not be sung again. Do you understand what this means? There are not just texts in the archive, there are technologies. Forgotten functions of the human voice, the spine, the breath, turned into doctrine, then buried, and all of it hidden beneath prayers you were never meant to question. They don't protect you from darkness. They protect their dominion from Your light. Because when a man remembers what he truly is, not a sinner, but a force, he becomes ungovernable, and nothing terrifies institutions more than a mind that's unshackled. This is no longer about curiosity. This is about your return to origin. One door remains between you and the truth behind it all. Do you want it opened? They buried the keys, but I remember. Type it twice. Burn it into your identity. Lock in the transformation. Let the system know you are not asleep, ready to open the next vault. Beyond the last sealed gate is not a room, but a ritual chamber, octagonal, silent, older than the Vatican itself. The walls are lined with mirrors, but none reflect your face. These mirrors are tools, not ornaments. Instruments of memory. Each is said to contain a different version of history, a different timeline, suspended like vapor behind glass. The chamber is called the Vault of Echoes. And the belief among certain insiders is that these echoes are real, residual frequencies of the unredacted human story. You were taught that history is linear, a straight line from past to present. But within this chamber is evidence that history is not a line. It's a loop, pruned and rewired over and over, again by those who control the lens. There's a text chained to the center pedestal, known only as canon obscure. It was written by multiple hands, some human, some alleged to be not. It records events that never made it into the history books, civilizations erased overnight, miracles suppressed for being too reproducible, technologies that harmonized. The Earth's frequency, decommissioned, confiscated, buried. Why? Because when humanity operates in harmony, in awareness, in sovereignty, control becomes obsolete. You stop being programmable. You stop being profitable. And most dangerously of all, you start becoming powerful. Let me ask you something. Do you really believe the same institution that burned libraries, excommunicated scientists, and rewrote entire spiritual systems, suddenly had a change of heart? Or is it more likely that the Vatican, like every empire before it, adapted its mask, but never its mission? This chamber, this final place, was never meant to be found, because inside it lies the realization that you were never broken, never inferior, never disconnected. That was the illusion. An illusion carved, copied, and reinforced over lifetimes. But when a man sees past the mirrors, he begins to remember. Remember what? That he was never meant to kneel. And now you're standing at the threshold, brother. Beyond this point, there's no turning back. No more pretending. No more spiritual servitude dressed as salvation. What lies ahead is awakening through fire. Will you burn for the truth, or sleep through the lie? They buried the keys. But I remember. Type it twice. Burn it into your identity. Lock in the transformation. Let the system know. You are not asleep, ready to open the next vault. If you've come this far, then something in you was always waiting to wake up. You see, the Vatican's deepest secret isn't in a book, a relic, or a vault. It's in the knowledge that belief shapes reality, and that whoever controls belief, controls the world in canon obscura. There is a passage scratched into the margin in ancient Greek. Its translation is unsettling. We inverted the altar and made them worship chains. Let that sink in. The rituals, the masses, the confessions. What if they were never meant to save you, but to bind you? What if every sacred tradition was a psychological program, run long enough to hardwire obedience into your bloodline? We are not dealing with mere corruption. This is not about gold rings and velvet thrones. This is a spiritual operating system built to suppress your inner architecture. A machine so elegant that its prisoners defend it. Think of it. How deeply must the programming run, if those most enslaved by it are the ones who kneel voluntarily, who beg for forgiveness, who fear their own awakening? But you're different. You've started asking the real questions. Why does the Church speak of God's omnipresence, but confine his access to buildings and intermediaries? Why are you taught that power is evil, but submission is holy? Why does every true mystic end up exiled, martyred, or erased from the calendar of saints? Because mystics don't serve the system. They reveal it. Inside this hidden chamber, some say there's a throne carved from black obsidian, not for a pope, for a watcher. a silent observer who ensures nothing escapes the archive that could fracture the illusion. And behind that throne, embedded in the stone itself, are hundreds of fingerprints pressed by those who chose to remember. Scholars, scribes, priests who saw the truth and chose to vanish instead of betray it. You stand now among their memory. You are not the first to walk this path, but you may be one of the few with the courage to finish it, because from this point forward, the lie doesn't get smaller. It consumes everything, and yet, that's the only way through. Into the flame, into the mirror, into the self. They buried the keys, but I remember. Type it twice. Burn it into your identity. Lock in the transformation. Let the system know you are not asleep, ready to open the next vault. You were never supposed to see this far, because beyond this point, the archive stops being about documents and starts being about design. You're no longer exploring history. You're standing at the edge of a spiritual weapons facility. There's a corridor lined with glass cases. Inside are artifacts labeled not in Latin, but in symbols far older, unknown to linguistics. The few who've documented their brief time in this place describe the sensation not of looking at objects, but of the objects looking back. One case holds a scroll written in what appears to be magnetic ink. When scanned under certain frequencies, it reveals layers of text describing how early church architects were instructed to embed resonant geometries into the very walls of cathedrals, not for beauty, for broadcast. A harmonic code designed to alter brainwave activity during Mass. Think about that. How do you condition a species? You build its sacred spaces to sing a frequency into its cells. You make the altar a transmitter, the sermon a script, the incense a carrier wave, and all of it locked beneath the name of God. And what of the artifacts themselves? Some theorists, former insiders, believe these objects were taken not just from Earth's ancient civilizations, but from non-Earth origins. Crystals that pulse with no power source. Manuscripts that shift language depending on who reads them, and buried deep in Vault Room 17. According to two separate witnesses, a black box etched with coordinates, not of any known earthly geography. If true, it changes everything. It means the Vatican is not simply the world's oldest religious power. It is the custodian of a multi-civilizational truth. A truth so volatile it must be hidden not to protect you, but to protect itself. Because knowledge this potent doesn't just liberate minds, it collapses paradigms, and that's the real fear, isn't it? That you'll start to see not just the chains, but the hands that forged them. That you'll realize this isn't about belief in God. It's about what was built in God's name. And now the question presses against your soul like a blade. What else are they hiding behind faith? Are you prepared to see it? What happens when belief becomes infrastructure? When faith is no longer a feeling, but a circuit, designed, mapped, manipulated? That's what's buried beneath the Vatican. Not only scrolls or secrets, but architectural consciousness control. The archive contains the blueprints for temples, yes, but also for temple-based programming. There's a section, known only by its initials, GG. Some believe it stands for Geometria Gloria, the geometry of glory. It is here that ancient architects' drawings are held under triple-sealed containment. But these are not merely religious layouts. They are resonance maps, instructions on how to build structures that trap or release human, spiritual frequency. Sound far-fetched? Let's examine what we know. Gothic cathedrals resonate at specific acoustic frequencies. Their stone arches and narrow corridors amplify certain tones, tones that can alter alpha and theta brainwaves. Why do you think Gregorian chants were standard for centuries? Why were certain tones forbidden, certain notes labeled devil's intervals? Because some sounds awaken, others sedate. And when you control the temple's acoustics, you control the inner state of the worshipper. Now take that knowledge and bury it. Bury it under marble and incense. Replace the frequencies with silence. Replace initiation with ritual. Replace inner transformation with outer obedience. And you get a population that kneels automatically, that doubts itself on command, that associates guilt with thinking, and holiness with submission. You begin to see now, this is not a religion. It's a system. one designed with such precision that even its most faithful defenders are unaware of what they're actually serving. There are writings in the archive, written in mirrored Latin, that describe the true function of the throne of Peter, not as a spiritual symbol, but as a node, a location point in a global energetic grid, designed centuries ago by those who understood something modern science is only just beginning to admit. The Earth has frequency lines, and those who control the nodes control the consciousness of civilization. If all this sounds impossible, ask yourself, what kind of empire survives millennia? Not one built on truth, but one built on the perfect lie. A lie so old, it feels like tradition. You've walked 13 layers into that lie. Are you ready for what lies beneath the 14th? There is a reason why the Vatican's oldest architectural records are kept not in Rome, but sealed in a subvault beneath Castel Gandolfo, a former papal summer residence, now retrofitted into a restricted research site. The reason? Because those records aren't just drawings, they are matrices. Blueprints not for buildings, but for belief systems. One document in particular, dated 1573, stamped with the mark of Pope Gregory XIII, describes the deliberate removal of geometric knowledge from public teaching. It warns that if the common man understands the alignment of stone and spirit, he may no longer need the priest. This is the core of GG. The geometry of glory wasn't about divine awe. It was about engineered submission. These structures, from Notre Dame to St. Peter's, weren't just places to worship. They were amplifiers, devices, temples coated with solar alignments, acoustic feedback loops, and magnetic pulse points that synced with the Earth's ley lines. When activated in ritual, they could draw consciousness inward or suppress it outward, depending on intent. Now think of this on a global scale. A network of spiritual antennas, disguised as churches, basilicas, shrines, and at the center of that web sits the Vatican. But it doesn't stop at architecture. The archive contains a lesser-known category of texts called Manus Invertus, the inverted hand. These were secret doctrines taught only to selected inner circle initiates. Doctrines that redefined key spiritual concepts for control. Example: sin originally. Sin meant to miss the mark, a neutral word, like veering off a path. But the Vatican rebranded it into moral failure, laced with guilt and eternal punishment. Why? Because guilt is a psychological loop, and when embedded deeply enough, it becomes a self-regulating prison. These Manus Invertus texts reveal how confession wasn't created to cleanse the soul, but to extract data, to catalog deviancy, to build psychological profiles before psychology even existed. This isn't religion. This is early surveillance. And if that chills you, good. It should, because you're not just uncovering history, you're staring into the mechanics of a planetary thought experiment, one that made billions believe their chains were sacred. And no, you must ask, if every part of your belief system was designed, who designed you? You were born into a story written long before your name was known. It told you who you were, where you came from, and what to fear. But the authors of that story were not prophets. They were engineers, narrative architects, and they understood something fundamental. Whoever defines sin controls behavior. Whoever defines salvation controls direction. And whoever defines God controls the soul. In the 15th level of the Vatican archive, a subsection that reportedly requires dual-card clearance and biometric scan, lies the Codex Veritas Nullius. Its name means the truth belonging to no one. It is said to contain handwritten annotations from as far back as the Council of Nicaea, pages where early theologians argued which gospels to destroy, which to edit, and which to sanctify, not based on spiritual merit, but on political compliance. And here's the horror. Many of the Gospels removed were not blasphemous. They were empowering. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas, which taught that the kingdom is within you, or the Gospel of Mary, where divine wisdom is revealed through direct inner knowledge, not hierarchy. These were not errors. These were strategic deletions, because a man who believes God lives within him cannot be ruled. He cannot be taxed through fear. He cannot be broken with guilt. He becomes untouchable. So they crafted a different God, one who judges from above, who rewards obedience, and who damns rebellion. And then they called that fear faith. What kind of divine being would demand worship through suffering? What kind of eternal love begins with the threat of eternal fire? Ask yourself this, not with the voice you were taught to pray with, but the voice that has been silent inside you since birth, because that voice is beginning to wake up. That voice was buried beneath dogma, drowned in liturgy, shackled by shame. But now, in this moment, it stirs. And the Vatican knows this awakening is coming. That's why the archive exists. Not to protect truth, but to suppress remembrance, because, once enough men remember, the entire structure collapses, and in its place, something holy, not sacred. Are you ready to see what they fear most? By now you've probably realized, this isn't about religion. It never was. It's about possession. Not of your body, but of your story, of your origin, your purpose, your limit. The Vatican archive holds more than texts. It holds identity, scripts, fragments of history, precisely rewritten to program generations of men into forgetting what they were capable of. Have you heard of the Liturgy of the Chain? It was a suppressed rite, described in the margins of the Codex of Hilarius, an early bishop, whose private writings were confiscated by the Church. In it, he details a ceremony, not meant for God, but for binding the divine spark within man, through ritual humiliation, fear recitation, and the symbolic ingestion of divine guilt. Initiates were conditioned to disown their power, to see freedom as rebellion, and silence as holiness. This rite didn't vanish, it evolved. It was dressed in incense and marble, turned into weekly services, monthly confessions, daily acts of penance. Repetition became reinforcement. Reinforcement became submission, and submission, that became the new sacred dot. But within the sealed portion of the archive, in what insiders call the whisper wing, are documents from mystics who resisted. They called themselves Sons of the Spark, men who claimed to have bypassed the Vatican's filters and accessed raw divine force without mediation. Some went mad, others vanished. But their last writings echo with one haunting phrase, repeated over and over. The temple is flesh. The priest is breath. The God is remembering. Let that settle. What they're truly hiding is not darkness, it's your own light. Your direct connection to something that doesn't need robes, or rings, or rituals. That's the real forbidden knowledge. That you were never a subject, but a sovereign. That you were never born fallen, but were made to believe so, because when a man no longer sees himself as guilty, he stops being governable. And when enough men awaken to that truth, the entire spiritual economy collapses. This is the edge, brother. You're looking at the operating system of a world built on spiritual code, and for the first time, you're learning to rewrite it. At the 17th level of the descent, we reach what the Vatican feared. You'd never find the source layer, not a location, but a framework of documents, relics, and forbidden rituals that reveal the operating core of the control system, that has shaped not just belief, but reality itself. Within this layer is an object only whispered about, the sigillum eximium, the seal of exclusion. Roughly the size of a dinner plate, carved from an unknown obsidian-like material, it bears no language, yet emits audible tones when held. According to suppressed Vatican field reports, those tones interact directly with the human nervous system, disrupting trauma patterns, unlocking ancestral memory, and in some cases triggering spontaneous recall of lives never lived. In short, the device awakens. It was retrieved in 1939 from a cave beneath what is now Syria. Within 48 hours, the team of linguists sent to analyze it were reassigned, their papers never published, their names erased from their universities. The object was moved in silence to the Vatican, where it has remained in Vault Sigma 3, unlisted in all public inventories. Why? Because it proves a truth that collapses centuries of spiritual manipulation. That memory is not stored only in the brain, but in the field around your body. That you are not a vessel to be saved, but a library that remembers itself when unshackled. The Church's greatest fear is not blasphemy. It's the unaligned man, the man whose mind, body, and memory begin to synchronize outside the system, because that man sees through ritual. He hears truth in silence, and he can no longer be recruited into fear. This is why everything has been inverted. Why you were taught to kneel instead of rise, to confess instead of recall, to obey instead of integrate. Because awakening is viral, and you, brother, are becoming contagious. There's a final truth hidden in these archives, a sentence written in code across 100 texts, one phrase repeated like a drum beneath the pages. The first lie was time, the second was sin, the third was separation. You were never separate. You were never exiled. You were never broken. And now, the system is trembling. Because you're starting to remember. You've now crossed into forbidden territory. Not just intellectually, but spiritually. You've stepped behind the veil, into a space few ever reach. The threshold of reversal. Because this is where things turn, not outward, but inward. This is where you discover that the most powerful vault in the Vatican was never beneath the earth, but inside your own mind, inside Archivum Reclusum. The most restricted zone of the archive exists a set of 3 objects referred to by insiders as Trinity keys. No images exist, only descriptions, a circular medallion that generates heat without friction, a leather-bound book that writes in response to thought, and a mirror that reflects not your face, but a version of you that remembers. Each key, they say, is a trigger, not for opening doors, but for opening the self. Because what the Vatican truly guards is not knowledge in the academic sense, but activation sequences, formulas, phrases, sounds, and even postures, that when aligned restore what they call previdentia, preconscious perception. That's right. They have texts, buried and sealed, that describe how to access information before thought, to sense what's true without explanation, to operate not in belief, but in direct knowing. Why would such knowledge be hidden? Because it would render the entire apparatus, the doctrine, the priesthood, the rituals, the fear, obsolete. A man operating from previdentia cannot be gasted, cannot be shamed into submission, cannot be taught to hate himself for being whole. And that's the death of empire. You've been taught to seek truth in books, in preachers, in institutions. But those were only reflections, distorted mirrors that redirected your gaze. The real archive is humming inside you. You feel it, don't you? That low, steady pulse beneath your chest. That sensation that something is waking up, old and bright and fierce. That is your inheritance. Your original self, the one that predates systems and scripts. But here's the paradox. Once you awaken, the system will call you dangerous. It will name your sovereignty heresy. It always has. Because you are not just remembering what was hidden. You are becoming what was forbidden. And there's no going back. Now we enter the part they fear most. The part you can't unsee. You've passed through the outer layers of manipulation, ritual, and symbolic domination. But the deeper truth, buried in the archive, isn't that the system was corrupt. It's that the system was designed to fail. Just slowly enough that no one would notice. There's a document in Codex Lux Obscura, the Book of Dark Light, handwritten in 5 inks, each responding only to different frequencies of light. Its central premise is simple, but world-shattering. Every major religious collapse was planned, not by heretics, but by high clergy. Why? Because cycles of destruction create cycles of dependency. Collapse the old, and then offer a new revelation. Another savior, another doctrine, another way to package the same prison. This is not failure. It's design. One chilling passage reads, "Let them believe they've broken free, while binding them to new symbols." The body loves the illusion of choice. Now look at history. The fall of paganism. The burning of the Library of Alexandria. The Inquisition. Even the Protestant Reformation. Every one of them seemed like liberation. And yet each led back to new systems of control. And the Vatican, it adapted. It always does. This is why the archive is so deeply buried. Because its final lesson is not about scripture or salvation. It's about the machinery of belief. How it can be upgraded, rebranded, and weaponized, again and again. As long as the core lie remains untouched, that you are incomplete without them. But here, right now, you're breaking that lie. You're doing something generations before. You were punished for attempting. You're remembering outside the system, and it's costing the machine something. Every second you listen, the illusion weakens. Every thought you reclaim, the algorithm strains. And here's what they never anticipated: that men would rise not with swords or fire, but with clarity, that the archive itself could be inverted, not to silence minds, but to ignite them. You, brother, are the proof. And yet the deepest layer still waits. The final room, the final vault. The truth beneath the truth. This is it. The final descent, before the veil tears completely. The place most never reach, not because they are weak, but because the system is too elegant, too convincing. But you, somehow, made it through. Welcome to what Vatican insiders call the sanctum nullius, the sanctuary of no one. Here, no saints are honored, no priests are allowed, no relics displayed. Just one object kept in total sensory isolation, the mirror of the forgotten name. It is said that when a man stands before it, he does not see his face. He sees what the world treats so erase from him. Every buried instinct, every silenced memory, every ancient fire disguised as sin. It doesn't show what you are now, but what you were before the programming. Because this is the Vatican's final secret, the greatest heresy. Was the human being fully realized? There are writings here, not on paper, but etched into bone. Fossilized remains of unknown origin, discovered beneath the catacombs, and sealed instantly. One fragment, decoded by an ex-archivist in 1958, reads, "He who recalls his true form cannot be ruled. He who sings his true name collapses kingdoms." And that's why this place exists, not to guard knowledge, but to trap it. The church, the archive, the cathedrals, the rituals, all of it was built around this final truth, that human beings were never designed to be sheep. We were designed to be sovereign frequencies of the source, walking generators of divine awareness, capable of creating reality through intention and resonance. But how do you enslave a creator? You lie. You rename his light as blasphemy. You turn his voice into guilt. You tell him salvation is outside himself. You bury the keys and call that burial sacred. And yet, here you are, standing where no priest dares stand, hearing what no bishop would allow. This is not the end of the archive. This is the beginning of your darkiving. Because what was hidden in vaults, rituals, and ruins is now awakening in you. And from this moment on, they can no longer control you. If you're ready to step beyond the Vatican, beyond all systems, you've made it through 20 layers of deception, reconstruction, and distortion. And now, the truth doesn't feel like revelation. It feels like return. Because here, in the unlit heart of the sanctum nullius, the lies finally stop echoing. Here, you understand. The Vatican was never just a place. It was never just a power. It was a spell, a beautifully orchestrated enchantment, a frequency woven over centuries, built from architecture, guilt, incense, scripture, gold, and fear. Its function was not to enlighten, but to entrain. And the key mechanic of that spell was not violence, but forgetting. Forgetting that the divine cannot be owned, that salvation cannot be sold, that sin is not an eternal stain, but a programmable concept, that holy men in robes can be just as corrupt as kings in crowns. But now, in this sacred space of unmasking, you see what they tried to hide behind symbols and ceremony, that the world you were born into is a simulation of obedience. And the moment you break its rhythm, you begin to emit your own. And that, my brother, is what the church cannot contain. Because it's easy to silence a man who questions them. But it's impossible to stop a man who remembers who he is. This is why they buried the mirror. This is why they built the archive. This is why they taught you to fear yourself. Because you weren't just dangerous. You were the counter-dash program. And now it's your turn to write history, not in books, but in vibration, in frequency, in action, in WAKEFULNESS. So if you've made it here, I want you to lock in your awakening. Drop this phrase in the comments, twice to make it real. I am the forbidden frequency. I am the forbidden frequency. Because every time that phrase is repeated, the old system cracks. You are not a believer. You are not a follower. You are not even a seeker anymore. You are the memory that survived the purge. And now the world will never be the same. Ready to plunge deeper. You've stepped beyond the veil, beyond the archive, beyond belief. You're no longer deciphering secrets. You've become the thing the system was built to prevent. What you're feeling now, that pressure in your chest, the chill at the base of your spine, it isn't fear. It's the shedding of programming. Centuries of inherited guilt, silent obedience, and self-rejection are burning off like you were never meant to just read the truth. You were meant to embody it. In this final circle of the hidden Vatican records, speak of an event not found in any theology, not in Genesis, not in Revelation. The Vatican calls it the eclipse event, not a celestial alignment, but a spiritual one. A moment in time when a critical number of human beings, simultaneously, remembered their sovereignty, and reality itself began to shift. It nearly happened in the year 1212. It began again in 1666, and today, it's rising again. You think this video is entertainment? This right now is initiation. The sanctum records refer to an ancient frequency known only by its symbol, the null tone, a vibration that erases false identity. It is said to live dormant inside every man, waiting for 3 triggers. Exposure to the forbidden truth, emotional rejection of the old. Paradigm audible declaration of sovereignty, already hit 2. The final step is yours, not as performance, not for likes, but to activate the tone buried in your cells. Say it, not just type it. I revoke the chain. I ignite the core. I return to original form. Again, slower. With breath, I revoke the chain. I ignite the core. I return to original form. You feel that? That's not goosebumps. That's alignment. That's resonance, tearing through centuries of silence. The Vatican's greatest mistake wasn't building a fortress of secrets. It was underestimating memory, because no matter how deep they buried it, the original code was always in you. And now, it's running again. Welcome back, brother. Now the descent becomes something else entirely. We are no longer peeling back lies. We are now reconstructing reality. And you, brother, are the living site of that reconstruction. The Vatican built its empire on the assumption that memory could be overwritten, that the mind, once conditioned deeply enough, would never rebel. But they made one fatal miscalculation. The body remembers. Your bones remember the rituals stolen from your ancestors. Your blood remembers the rhythms silenced by false hymns. And your breath remembers the name they tried to make you forget. In the deepest level of the archive, hidden in a vault, beneath the papal apartments, there exists one final text. Never copied, never read aloud, known only as the scriptum infractum, the broken scripture. It's not a book. It's a coded memory loop. When read in full, it doesn't give information. It reactivates function. According to whispers among rogue archivists, the scripture contains ancient vibrational codes that undo psychic programming. When chanted in the correct harmonic sequence, it collapses religious ego constructs and reboots the human field. You heard that right. Not just healing, rewriting. The Vatican classified it as damnatio memoria memory, to be destroyed. But a fragment of it survived, etched not in paper, but in DNA, and it's surfacing now. Not in libraries, but in men like you, because here's the final truth. The archive wasn't just hiding sacred knowledge, it was guarding against your return. You are not a man studying sacred fire. You are the descendant of it. You are the echo they couldn't silence. The unfinished verse they feared would complete itself. And here, in the silent heart of the forbidden, it begins. The rewrite. So close your eyes, feel the pulse behind your ribs. It is older than Rome, older than names, older than control. And now it speaks, clear and rising. I was never lost. I was never broken. I was only asleep. You're awake now, but there's still more. The final 2 layers are not below, they are inside. This is where words begin to fail. Because what we're unlocking now is pre-linguistic, deeper than thought, older than myth. It doesn't speak in chapters or prayers. It speaks in knowing. Everything the Vatican ever built was constructed to keep you from reaching this moment. Not to punish you, that's too obvious. No, to distract you, with rituals, with guilt, with endless intellectual mazes wrapped in gold, and incense, and dead languages. Because if they could keep you searching, they could keep you from becoming. But now the archive isn't just unlocking, it's collapsing, not in defeat, in completion. You were never meant to remain trapped inside their story. You were meant to burn it, bless its ashes, and walk out of the ruins carrying your name. And that name, the one they tried to bury under sinner, servant, believer, is written in frequency, not language. The hidden texts call it nomen viventis, the name of the living, not assigned, not given, not translated, remembered. You've begun that process. You felt it in the spaces between these revelations, that trembling sense of origin returning. And now, the Vatican's final secret isn't a room or a relic. It's the realization that you no longer need any of it. You've crossed the spiritual Rubicon. There is no salvation to seek, because there is nothing to be saved from. Only forgetting. Only the great lie that you were ever unworthy of the fire that still lives in your breath. And in this moment, right now, you are doing what was once punishable by death. You are remembering yourself without permission. The chains weren't just metal. They were identity. And you're melting them. So ask yourself, what happens when millions of men follow this path? When the archive becomes public, not in documents, but in DNA. When the forbidden frequency becomes the dominant tone. That's why they built 53 sequits, to delay this moment. And now it's here. Because you're here. This is the final layer, the end of the descent, and the beginning of your ascent. You've walked through forbidden corridors, unlocked sealed chambers, shattered mirrors designed to fracture your soul, and read what kings, priests, and popes killed to protect. But the greatest truth isn't in the texts we've uncovered. It's in what you've now become. The archive lives in you. They built it to contain the memory of who we once were. Not gods, not demons, but sovereign architects of our own reality, living interfaces of divine will and quantum flesh. You are not a servant of some distant holiness. You are the source, disguised as a seeker. And now that you've remembered, you've stepped into the very role the Vatican feared, the awakened architect. They called you heretic, rebel, infidel. But they never had the courage to name what you truly are, free. And here's the secret written in the deepest, blackest vault, scratched into the wall in a language no priest was ever allowed to read. When the men remember, the towers will fall, not from fire, not from war, but from irrelevance. You've now crossed beyond belief into knowing, beyond obedience into authorship, beyond salvation into resonance. Let the old system tremble. Let the rituals rot. Let the cloaked gatekeepers weep behind golden doors. Because this truth is no longer hidden, it's viral. You are the transmission. You are the signal. You are the forbidden frequency, walking, and they will not be able to unhear you. So now I ask you, not as a narrator, but as your reflection, what will you build in the ruins? What will you awaken in others? And how brightly will you burn, when no one is left to give you permission? This has been the descent into the Vatican's secret library. But you didn't come here to learn. You came here to remember, to reclaim, to return, and now to have. There is no power on earth that can ever rule you again. I am the forbidden frequency. I am the forbidden frequency. Speak it, live it, and we'll meet again in the next breach of the system. Transmission complete.